but rather the small, meaningful steps we can take in our own lives at the local level, in our elections, and with community groups for meaningful work that drives basic human values. Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Luke. I want to start by sharing my screen. Also just want to ask for your, your indulgence, as I believe I do not possess the eloquence of either my colleagues, Luke or Melissa, but I wanted to share a little bit about my experience and my takeaways from last Wednesday. I wanted to start just about talking about my connection with DC. Some of you know this. I love it. I have a deep connection to the city. I lived and worked there for 20 years. I have great friends there. I met my wife there. My son was born there. Here's a shot of my son from a few years ago in front of the very Capitol that was stormed last week. One of the greatest parts of DC is the deep history of demonstrations and political events, most of which have been both passionate but peaceful, and many of which I was able to witness over my time there, whether it was the counter protests at the Bush-Cheney inauguration, Obama's first inauguration, and the first Women's March, March for Our Lives, etc. And then there's what happened last Wednesday. As I started to get texts from my friends and former colleagues in DC, I didn't know what to think. I tuned into the news. I couldn't believe the images that I saw of the Capitol. After living through 9/11 in DC and knowing how much security and surveillance were put into place in our government buildings, I was initially confused. Then I became disturbed and very angry by what I saw happening. So I'm here sharing a perspective with you. Please take it for what it is. It's one person's perspective. I certainly don't have the magic solution to what we see happening, the problems we're facing. In fact, I bet a lot of your teachers and your parents and guardians feel the same way, confused, upset, apprehensive about what might happen next. I don't say this to invite pity or imply that you have to take care of us, but perhaps I can appeal to your capacity for empathy. We're here to teach you, to support you, to care for you, but that doesn't mean we have it all figured out. It's just to say that even as you get older, there will be days and times that get the best of you, and we all need to find a way to keep moving forward. Here's some other takeaways I'd like to share. First is for the white folks in the audience. It's okay for you to be sad, frustrated, anxious, pissed off. I won't take that away from you. I'm with you. But please don't think for a minute that you get what it's like to be a person of color, especially a Black American at this moment. The images we saw speak volumes about the discrepancies between the treatment of different types of protesters. LeBron said it most recently, we live in two Americas. There's a huge gap in how white folks, especially white men, are treated in this country, whether it's by law enforcement, politicians, or those producing news coverage. To argue otherwise is to deny reality. I say this to share that it may not be your place right now to do a lot of talking about recent events with your friends of color. You should follow their lead about their willingness to talk with you. You should listen to them. And above all, you should believe them when they share their concerns and their frustrations with the way things are. We have to be careful about what we consume. Just as much of the food industry is not built to ensure that you receive proper nourishment, it's designed for profit. So it goes for online news, social media, and numerous individuals that are in business. They're not in business to ensure that you have a healthy and balanced diet of information. They are in business to capture your attention, to stoke your fear, to push your emotional buttons, and above all, to earn your loyalty and your repeat business. By realizing this, you have a choice about what you consume. Just as a lot of people in our country don't have access to nutritious food, many do not have access to quality information. By virtue of the education you're receiving in your families and at bay, you have access to better tools to differentiate between the truth and propaganda, between the healthy and the unhealthy. You need to work to ensure that you nourish yourself with good, accurate, balanced information and apply your skills of critique to determine the difference. And I know Melissa's going to reference more of this coming up soon. Another takeaway. We have to be critical of our country in order to improve and to grow. James Baldwin said, "I love America more than any country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." We have to be open, as we are right now, to admit that things are not going well before we can do the work to move forward. We're in an era of extreme levels of disconnection, suffering, and distrust. And I believe that this has led to high levels of prejudice and belief in conspiracies. I do believe that our government, corporations, and public figures need to take stands on important moral and social matters in order to set a tone of peace and civility. But I still believe that there are more good people than bad people in this country, and that there is power on the individual level, that individuals can make progress by being open to dialogue with those of different viewpoints and experiences. We have to be willing to put ourselves in contact with those who are different from us. We have to suspend judgment. We have to be curious. We have to ask questions. When we hear beliefs that don't match up with our own, even if they're biased or offensive, we have to remember to inquire about their experiences. We have to inquire about their sources of information. And we have to be willing to talk about our own experiences and be open to have our beliefs and biases examined as we seek to build consensus and move forward in what we believe is right. This was a year of firsts. It continues to be a second year of firsts, if you will, in a time when so many unprecedented things have occurred: a worldwide pandemic, an attempted coup on American soil. It's frightening to think about what the next first will be. But I remind myself that the term unprecedented is a neutral term. In the same period, there have been very positive firsts. For example, unprecedented increase in support for the Black Lives Matter movement and police and criminal justice reform. We witnessed the first election of a female vice president, of color no less. So I remain hopeful that the coming firsts we see will be ones that are positive. I'm going to leave you with another quote and an invitation. As you know, I spend a great deal of time looking for quotes, whether it's my message board at school or the Burnt Toast Bulletin. The other day was Joan Baez's 80th birthday, and I found this quote: "Action is the antidote to despair." It struck me. Action is the antidote to despair. So I encourage you, as we look ahead to what might be rocky times before things get better, I urge you to take the small steps and to act where you can make a difference, even if it's a small difference. Think about the people around you who need help. Think about organizations you can support. Think about your friends, your family members, your neighbors, people you walk by on the street. Taking a step in the direction of making this world a better place in even the smallest way can be a great way to help you cope with trying and uncertain times. Thank you. Melissa?
Thank you, Aaron and Luke. And Aaron, thank you also for continuing to guide the visuals of my own reflection. So I wanted to start my reflection with this meme because it encapsulates how witnesses of the same event can craft very different narratives about it. It demonstrates a common way we are used to consuming information today. There's an image that our mind immediately starts to process and interpret. These two dogs made a mess. And then there is text to help us make sense of the image. So here the text is blaming another culprit for the mess, Antifa, right? Or an anti-fascist movement. Taking the meme at face value, if you are left-leaning in your politics, your reaction will probably be, no way Antifa did it. It's clear that the dogs are to blame. If you are right-leaning in your politics, your reaction may be, of course Antifa did it, right? Those troublemakers, and they tried to frame my innocent dogs. Same text, same image, two different interpretations, two different realities. Aaron, if you could move on to the second image. Similarly, many people in this country came across these two images comparing the police presence at Black Lives Matter protests at the Capitol this past June to what happened this past Wednesday at the Capitol building. Visually, Trump supporters, the majority of them white men, overwhelmed the stairs and successfully stormed the building. Same photos, yet the country had two very different interpretations of them. Many people of color and white anti-racists interpreted the comparison as a clear sign of racism, how an apparatus of the government, the police, violently react to people of color when they gather in peaceful protest, and sadly, even when asleep in their own homes, and how that same apparatus is complicit in aiding white supremacy, right? i.e., not preventing violent armed white men who have expressed in writing on social media platforms like Parler their intent of capturing and harming lawmakers who are confirming the election of Joe Biden. Yet many white Americans have interpreted these photos as symbols of patriotism. On the top, the police there to protect the people, the government, image on the bottom, Trump supporters there to protest and defend President Trump's claim that the election was a fraud and it was stolen from him. Aaron, if you could move forward. Now I want to step back for a moment to talk about how bias works in the brain. And I'll be referring to Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Greenwald's research in their book, Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People. They begin the book with the image you see here of two tabletops and claim that the two tabletops are exactly the same in shape and size. They reference how the brain has evolved to translate 2D images to make sense of them in a 3D world. Thus, the part of our brain that understands depth adds a visual dimension to this picture that is inaccurate. And yet, surprisingly, even when we are told that what we are visually perceiving is inaccurate, our brains cannot see this image differently. They write that the knowledge you now have has no corrective effect in diminishing the illusion. Our mind does a great deal of its work automatically, unconsciously, and unintentionally. The research goes on to illustrate that the mind has the power to alter memory. It's called retroactive interference or the misinformation effect. Their point is that language can shape how we remember things. The examples they give are the frequency of inaccurate testimonies from eyewitness accounts in police reports and trials, and how they are generated depending on how questions are framed in those police reports and in those trials. Our brains fill in gaps for us based on the information available, and that includes our political beliefs, our biases, previous experiences, and the narratives we are told as we move through the world. When presented with information that contradicts our sense of the world, a common human reaction is to dismiss that information because it causes a lot of discomfort in us. Other than diversifying our media consumption and being critical consumers of media, pay attention to the images that they use and the language used to describe that image or event. Are Black Lives Matter protests being referred to as riots? Are the Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol referred to as terrorists? I also want you to consider who are the people in your life sharing their experience or worldview. If we surround ourselves with people who think and look like us, we are narrowing the ways in which our brains process information, leaving ourselves open to blind spots.